HOA Karen blocks ambulance from coming to my house. Moving to this neighborhood was supposed to be a fresh start. I had just bought my first home, a modest but comfortable house in an HOA-controlled community. The rules were strict, but I figured they'd keep the area looking nice and orderly. I never expected that those same rules would nearly cost my father his life. My father, a retired Vietnam veteran, had moved in with me after his health started to decline. He was in his 80s now, a tough old man who had seen things I couldn't even imagine. He had fought in the jungles of Vietnam, survived ambushes, and even earned a Bronze Star for his bravery in battle. He never talked much about it, but I had seen the photos. His young face hardened by war, standing beside his fellow soldiers, holding a rifle in the middle of the dense foreign terrain. I respected him more than words could say. And when he needed my help, I didn't hesitate to take him in. That's when I met Karen. She introduced herself the very first week I moved in. I was out front watering my lawn when she marched up to me with a clipboard in hand. Karen was a blonde woman in her 40s, slightly overweight, wearing a pink t-shirt and jeans. Her expression was one of forced politeness, like she had already decided she didn't like me but wanted to make it look like she was being neighborly.
Hello, I'm Karen. I'm the president of the HOA.
Oh, nice to meet you.
I just wanted to go over a few rules. Your garbage bins must be put out no earlier than 7 p.m. the night before collection and brought back in by 9 a.m. the next morning. Lawn maintenance is mandatory, no cars parked on the street overnight, and no non-approved decorations in front of the house.
Got it. I nodded, already feeling a headache coming on.
Oh, and one more thing. We expect everyone in this community to follow the rules, no exceptions. I'll be keeping an eye out.
That was my first warning. Karen's obsession with HOA rules soon became unbearable. One time she left a formal complaint in my mailbox because my grass was allegedly half an inch too tall. Another time she knocked on my door at 8 a.m. on a Saturday to tell me my recycling bin was not positioned at the correct angle on the curb. But the most ridiculous incident was when she tried to fine me for having an American flag hanging outside my house. I pointed out that the prohibition of displaying the flag does not contradict federal law, but she just sniffed and said,
"We'll see about that."
Still, I never imagined she could take things as far as she did that fateful morning. It was a quiet Saturday when my father collapsed in the living room. 1 second, he was fine, watching an old war documentary. Then the next, he was clutching his chest, gasping for breath. My heart pounded as I rushed to his side, feeling his pulse. It was weak. Panic set in as I grabbed my phone and called 911. The dispatcher assured me an ambulance was on the way. I held my father's hand, whispering to him, telling him to hold on. Minutes passed, and I finally heard the distant sound of sirens. Relief flooded me. Help was here. But then, the sirens stopped. I ran to the window and saw flashing lights near the entrance of our neighborhood. The ambulance wasn't moving forward. Confused, I stepped outside for a better look, and then I saw her, Karen, standing in the middle of the road, arms crossed, blocking the ambulance. I couldn't believe it. My chest tightened with rage and fear as I sprinted down the street. As I got closer, I heard her shrill voice arguing with the paramedics.
"You can't just drive in here,"
she snapped.
"This is a private road. You have no right to bring your emergency vehicles into my community without permission."
"Ma'am, we don't have time for this," one of the paramedics said firmly. "There is a medical emergency."
"And I am enforcing the community guidelines,"
Karen shrieked.
"No exceptions."
I skidded to a stop beside them, out of breath. "Karen, my father is dying! Move!" Karen turned to me with a fake, pitying smile.
"I'm sorry, but rules are rules."
"Are you serious?" I shouted. "This is life or death!" Karen scoffed.
"Maybe if you had read the HOA handbook, you would have known the procedure."
I wanted to scream. Instead, I spun around and ran back inside. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911 again. "The ambulance is being blocked by an HOA president named Karen. Send the police now." The dispatcher assured me officers were on the way, but every second mattered and my father was running out of time. Minutes later, a police car pulled up. An officer stepped out and quickly assessed the situation. "What's going on here?" he demanded. "This woman is blocking emergency services from reaching my father," I said, my voice shaking with rage. The officer turned to Karen, his jaw tightening. "Ma'am, step aside, now!" Karen huffed. "I'm just following the HOA regulations. This is obstruction of emergency personnel," the officer snapped. "You're under arrest." Karen's eyes widened.
What? You can't do that. I was just doing my job.
"Turn around," the officer ordered. "Hands behind your back." As the officer cuffed her, Karen shrieked,
This is a violation of my rights. I'll sue.
Ignoring her, the officer signaled to the paramedics. "Go!" The ambulance finally sped through, and I sprinted back to my house. The paramedics rushed in, stabilized my father, and got him to the hospital just in time. He survived. Later that evening, after the chaos settled, I sat beside my father's hospital bed, exhausted but relieved. The officer who arrested Karen had stopped by to check in. "She's facing charges for obstruction," he said. "She won't be bothering you again." I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. Good. As I looked at my father, peacefully resting, I realized just how dangerous blind obedience to rules could be. HOA guidelines were never meant to override human decency. And Karen? She learned the hard way that there are consequences for playing dictator. I knew one thing for sure, I wouldn't be renewing my HOA membership anytime soon. A few days after everything settled down, I was once again standing on my front lawn. The grass, of course, wasn't perfect. I hadn't had the time to tend to it, but I didn't expect this to become the cause of another conflict. As soon as I stepped outside, I saw Karen walking toward my yard, wearing that same familiar expression, arrogance, and a desire to teach me how to live.
You still haven't fixed the lawn? I told you that you need to keep up with things like this, and of course, you're ignoring the rules.
I sighed heavily. I had no desire to get into another argument with this woman, but her relentless aggression was starting to get to me again. "Karen, can you just leave me alone? I don't have time to tend to the lawn, but your inspections are completely unnecessary." She ignored my words and continued. "As the HOA president, it's my job to keep order in this neighborhood. And you, apparently, didn't understand that ignoring this will have consequences." I couldn't take it anymore and responded sharply, "Enough! You were arrested yesterday for blocking the ambulance and now you're starting again? Don't you see that your rules don't help anyone?" Karen pressed her lips together, her eyes narrowed.
That's none of your business. I'm doing my job. If you don't like the rules, you can just leave.
Her words sounded like a challenge, and I knew she wasn't going to stop. She was focused on control, on showing her power, and had no intention of changing her attitude. I realized that today, once again, I would be the target of her constant reproaches. "You'll never understand what it's like to have some decency," I said, clearly irritated. "Your rules aren't more important than people. When will you get that?" She didn't even answer, just curled her lips and turned away, leaving me standing on my front lawn with a sense of anger and helplessness. She had won this round again, and I realized that these miserable rules would never allow her to see the real values.